NFL Week 2 had it all. A Super Bowl rematch that was more of a gritty street fight than a shootout. A supposed homecoming game that turned into an absolute demolition derby. And a finish so wild, it'll have us talking about a single penalty for years to come. From Jalen Hurts' ugly football to the Lions' savage social media, we're breaking it all down. This is Beyond the Locker Room. Let's get into it. So let's start it off with the first game, and the biggest game probably of the weekend, the rematch of the Super Bowl. The Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles, the Super Bowl champs. Eagles win it, but it was ugly. Man, it was ugly. The Eagles secured a hard-fought victory, but the offense looked far from dominant. Hurts, passing stats were modest, and they typically usually are that. And the team once again relied heavily on Saquon Barkley, and also with Jake Elliott's big game and big leg getting the field goals. However, I would say they got to find a way to open up the offense a little bit more and find a way to get the ball to those explosive receivers. For Brown, that pretty much almost seemed like an afterthought. And I think the entire receiving core in this case, where they're getting little dump offs for 5-6 yards, they got to figure out a way to get that offense moving a bit better with that much talent. I get it. Jalen Hurts, he does his thing and he wins, but I don't know how much longer that can hold up. True, they have a great defense, but at some point you're going to run into a team that really can put up points. And that's something that's going to be very concerning moving forward. I think also, too, and you see this a lot with championship teams when they come back the next year, the burden of being, the hunted instead of the hunter, it starts to weigh on you as the season goes on, and keep an eye out on that with the Eagles as the season goes on. There's no doubt they have not looked like a dominant Super Bowl defending champion yet. But they may end up being one of those Super Bowl teams that has a switch, and they're able to flip it on late in the season, December. So we'll see and keep an eye and monitor that situation with Philadelphia. On the other side of the ball, the Kansas City Chiefs, in unfamiliar territory, I would say. They're now 0-2 for the first time since 2014. A massive cause for concern. The offense, specifically Mahomes and Kelce, struggled to find their rhythm. I think the offense, even though he led the team in catches, Kelce, overall the team doesn't have that same big play ability, and they're just not giving Patrick enough time. I mean, he's running around, with his chicken with a head cut off, and it was like, this is what we saw in the Super Bowl, this is what we saw in Week 1, and this is what we're seeing now. The offensive line has not been able to hold up. So Andy Reid's got to figure out something on that offensive line. I don't know. He has to keep it back in more often, but they need to find a way to protect Mahomes as much as possible. Give him a little bit of time to kind of see if he can push the ball down the field. If not, they're going to be sitting in a lot of 21-17 games and hoping that they can find some heroics at the end of the game. By either Chris Jones or Patrick Mahomes, and that's not going to cut it. I will say on the other side of the ball, though, the defense looked a lot better this week. They cleaned up a lot of stuff. I would say at the beginning of the game is like, the early couple of first drives by the Eagles, it didn't look promising, but they made some adjustments and they kind of got back to the type of Chiefs defense we've seen the last few years. And from that standpoint, I think if you're a Chiefs fan, you like that. But that offense, last year they were able to get away with a lot of heroics late in the game. Last season, the one possession games, I think they were at the top of the list, if not right at the top of the list of getting out of trouble. They were like Houdini, but those things have a way in sports to balancing it themselves out over time, and maybe we're seeing that now. Also to a little bit of a sidebar, Travis Kelce, showed a little frustration. When he had that drop late in the game, and that led to a turnover, and he was frustrated on the sideline, tossing the helmet. It was definitely a big turning point in the game. He seems it seems to be boiling over for him, and that's something where, hopefully he is able to kind of churn that into positive energy. And I suspect he will. He's a champion. He's one of the best tight ends ever. He'll figure it out. But they definitely seem to have frustration starting to show a little bit, on the edges a little bit for the Chiefs, and that schedule is not getting any easier in the coming weeks. So keep an eye on that. That could turn south pretty quickly if they don't be careful. Now, revenge for the Eagles. While the win gives the Eagles a measure of revenge for their the Eagles, for the Super Bowl loss for a few years ago, and also the win from last year, they've kind of been putting it to the Chiefs. It also raises a question about their offense that I mentioned before and the consistency moving forward. And that's where it comes down to playing big time teams, and can you actually be able to put up 28, 30 points if you need to. So let's move over to the next, the NFC North. Let's get over to that and that matchup. I focused on it a bit in week one with the Lions and Packers. I'm back in this division again because I think it's going to be one of the most fascinating divisions this year. And Bears-Lions, you call it the Ben Johnson homecoming, but he didn't have a really nice homecoming. As it started off well. I think it was 21-14 at some point during the first quarter or early second, and then pretty much, the brakes came right off at that point for the Bears. Lions dominated. The game was an absolute blowout after that. Lions offense led by Goff, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. They put up 52 points. So if there's any concerns we had with the Lions offense the week before, which I did mention, they got healthy real quick playing the Bears, and they went to town on the Bears. Never took the foot off the gas, and is it a statement victory? I don't know about that. It's the Bears when it's all said and done. So they, let's put it this way: it's a get healthy game if you're a Detroit fan, and that's all you can ask for. They're 1-1 now, and and it keeps them in touch with the Packers. Dan Campbell had a statement. He thought this was personal. It was a masterclass from Dan Campbell against his former offensive coordinator, Ben Johnson. The Lions showed they are still a top-tier team in the NFC. Even with Johnson leaving to go to Chicago, they still have a lot to prove, though, when we get to the postseason or late in the season, to see if they can actually win those big games and if Campbell can actually manage the games much better than he has in the past when it comes to these big type of leverage and high-pressure games. On the other side of the ball, the Chicago Bears. The struggles continue. They were outmatched on both sides of the ball. The team was plagued by turnovers, penalties, and a general lack of execution, which is what you see a lot of times with young teams. So it does raise some concerns about their direction and the new coaching staff. I did think that, I did think that Campbell did some nice things, with Williams this week. The ball was getting out a bit quicker. They seem to have a few more plays that kind of played into his creativity. So there was progress on that side, I would say, a little bit. On the and we'll get the defensive side, but that was a mess. I would say it was the Lions social media had a fun time, pretty much showing a lion a bear cub. Showing in this case they weren't in the same league, so they had a lot of good fun. And Detroit doesn't have a lot of opportunities in the last 30 years to have a lot of fun time. So hey man, enjoy yourself, Detroit Lion fans. Good on you. But the Bears defense, getting back to them, everyone's focusing on Caleb. That's not the issue, even though I think he and Dunze started combining and started making a nice connection, and that's positive if you're a Bears fan. That defense though, that needs some work, big time, in a hurry, or they're not gonna have a chance in any games. It doesn't matter what Caleb's progress is if they're gonna be down 15, 20 points by halftime. So that, to me, that's the right number where the focus needs to be. Absolutely needs to be. And Ben Johnson needs to, it doesn't matter how many cute plays he draws up for the offense. He and his staff need to get on that defensive side of the ball and get things sorted out, because they're getting no pressure. The secondary is getting scorched, and right now there's teams are going up and down the field, getting wherever they want. You can pick them apart any way you want to, but definitely through the air. Be it from the second half of last week with McCarthy looking like he's looking like, in this case, the second coming of Joe Montana, and this week we're the Lions are getting PBs, so they really need to tighten it up in a hurry, because in the division they're in, that could get ugly real fast. Moving on to the game number 3, I want to recap. Broncos-Colts. Um, I'll recall this game, the penalty that changed everything. Oh my goodness, what a what a wild finish this game was. This game definitely gonna be remembered for a lot of things, but it's gonna be remembered for this crazy conclusion. Um, man, I tell you, I know. I put it this way: the referees, I guess, had to make the call. Maybe I'm old school. I might let it slide, but the Broncos had what seemed to be a game-winning. I said, I would say the Broncos had seemed to be a game-winning field goal that missed from the Colts. Um, it was, but then all of a sudden the rare leverage penalty kicked out of the blue. That's one of those where it's like illegal defense in basketball out of the blue or something like that, or a foot fault in tennis out of the most inopportune moment. The leverage penalty called on Denver's defense. It gave new life to the Colts, and we all know what happened next. Clutch performance from the Colts rookie kicker Spencer Shrader, who got a second chance, and he stayed, and nailed the game-winning kick, moving the Colts to a surprising 2-0. And the reason why I chose this game actually is because, shout out to my cousin and their family who are big Colts fans, but I was a little bit, concerned when I saw Daniel Jones, of all people, was going to get the starting job. I still don't know that's the right decision. I still think Richardson should get a shot. You have a young talent like that. I don't like young talent sitting on the bench this long. That concerns me in that sense, especially a pick that's drafted that high. But hey, Daniel Jones at the moment. Daniel Jones, I must admit, on a side note, when I flipped over that game, for a second, it almost looked like a time warp when I saw Jones in the back of the Colts jersey. I said, wait, Burt Jones? The ghost of Burt Jones popped up. Hey, maybe he's still alive, so I don't want to disrespect the Jones family, but I just had some days the old Baltimore Colts where I see Jones, popping up with the Colts jersey. So that was like it had me feeling a little warm and fuzzy from a little nostalgic standpoint. But Daniel Jones had another impressive game. Proving week one may not have been a fluke. I don't know, but it's still Daniel Jones, and I'll wait to see. But so far, 2 for 2. The Colts offense looked potent and well coached. So far, we'll see what Shane has in mind in this case in the following weeks. But at the moment, he seems like the decision he made to go with Jones, as the issue was just an execution problem. Fair enough. It seems like it may have been, but as I said before, it is Daniel Jones. And for my buddy in this case here, he knows where he is. I know where you are. And, as a Giants fan, hey, you believe on Daniel Jones, you're asking for trouble. But, hey, props where props is due. That's what we do on Beyond the Locker Room. We give credit where credit is due. But on the other side, the Broncos side, it left Denver wondering what could have been. They could have gone to 2-0 as well, too. Peyton and the team were in position to have it done. Bo Nix played pretty well, but, fairly conservative, but did all right. But let slip away due to a costly error, and that's something that good teams just don't do. I'll now sum up just my final thoughts for the weekend. I think overall, some young teams are doing some things that you like. Some young quarterbacks are showing, Penix Jr. seems like he might be the real deal out there in Atlanta. Like what I saw from him. I just mentioned the Colts, looking like they're a surprise team. As well too, the Chiefs definitely are like they might be some trouble. And hey, man, how about them Cowboys? Boy, getting a win. I don't know if you should feel great, at home getting a win over the Giants. But that defense still needs work, man. Wow, that defense needs some work. Russell Wilson looking like my boy, like how he did back in the Seahawks days in that game. I'm not sure, Dallas, if that's where you want to be. As for the Vikings, on a side note, Vikings fans, think you need to worry about the product on the field a little bit more than worry about who's cheerleading. Just make a joke, but hey, don't come at me, Vikings fans. Just saying, I think right now I like McCarthy overall, but they definitely have some work to do there. Lots of other stories around the league, but I think those are the ones that kind of just jumped out at me at the moment. Oh yeah, and the Dolphins. We'll get to them later in the season. Right now the clock is ticking over there for McDaniel. I just say the clock is ticking. Folks are getting upset, people. Folks are getting upset down there in South Beach. Anyways, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for listening to the Beyond the Locker Room. Remember to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcast. You can also follow me on all my social media platforms at Beyond Locker Room. And until next time, guys, keep it locked. Peace.